what's going on, guys? It's Kevin Zwicker from Fast Count coming at you, and this is your 2025 Double or Nothing post show. It is a very late night from where I am at. This was a long freaking show, but we're here to discuss it. We're going to try to get out of here as quickly as we can because I am tired. It's been a long night, and I'm getting freaking old. Right? But this is a very good show from top to bottom. It really felt as if there really wasn't a lot of low points. If I had to pinpoint where there were low points, it had to be the women's championship match between Toni Storm and Mina Shirakawa and the Paragon versus the Don Callis family. But even those matches weren't that bad. And on any regular pay-per-view night, they would be considered solid entries. But just due to the fact that tonight's shows, where there was highs at, were just so high that you kind of had to pinpoint where the lows were, and they just happened to fall victim of that. But in a week where it feels as if the fan morale from the WWE side is as low as it's been in a really long time, due to TKO moving WrestleMania out of New Orleans and back to Vegas, and coming off of Saturday night's main event, where there was a lot of storyline progression, but a lot of nonsensical storyline progression, and it really kind of just felt as if there was just this big ad. Because the amount of commercial breaks that we got were insane. The fact that we set up this match for Money in the Bank, where you had Logan Paul teaming up with John Cena, which is something that I don't think anybody, when they started fantasy booking their John Cena retirement tour, had on their bingo card. And I don't think a lot of people wanted it on their bingo card. This show really re-emphasized in my mind just how important it is for us to have alternatives in the professional wrestling business. I know people, they kind of want to have revisionist history and look back at when WWE pre-AEW they were the biggest show in town. They would want to throw options like, well, there was New Japan, there was TNA. Be freaking honest, guys. Yes, I was a weekly viewer of Impact when it was on Spike TV. Yes, I watched New Japan. It kind of reignited my love for professional wrestling, the feud between Okada and Kenny Omega. But there really wasn't another option that was on this level. So it was at that point, it was either watch WWE and continue to watch what they are presenting you, or just quit being a wrestling fan. But now with a show like this, you can easily decide in your mind when WWE is having an off period, which you can consider it to be right now. You have a healthy alternative in AEW. This was a very, very good show, right? They kicked it off hot with the women's Owen finals between Mercedes Moné and Jamie Hayter. I know that going into this match, there was a lot of people that were on the side of Jamie Hayter. Obviously, Mercedes Moné is somebody who has been this champion, this very decorated champion, ever since she's left the WWE. She's gone all to these different promotions, whether it's New Japan, whether it was in the UK just now recently when she lost our championship in that four-way for the New Japan Strong Women's Championship. But going into this match, Jamie was obviously the underdog. She was somebody who was a previous winner of the AEW Women's Championship, something that Mercedes Moné hasn't accomplished since being in AEW. But this is probably Mercedes' best match in AEW. This easily went over 20 minutes. This was a match where very back and forth. It was really good to see them showcase both of these women's strong suits. At the end of the night, we saw Mercedes win the Women's Owen Cup Finals, which I'm sure a lot of people aren't going to be that happy with, because I know she's starting to get that reputation of being, Mercedes Hogan. But the way that they were able to wrap this up, right? You had Jamie Hayter, and it was very reminiscent to WrestleMania 28. If you remember that match where you had John Cena taunt The Rock by going for the people's elbow and then The Rock catching him with a rock bottom, this ending was very similar, where you saw Jamie Hayter flexing her muscles, about to hit the Haterade, but you saw Mercedes Moné roll her up, pick up the win, and she is our 2025 Women's Cohen Cup winner, right? Setting up a potential big time showdown at All In. You know, now with the winners that they had with both of these individuals, that they're setting up to try to stack this card as much as they possibly can. I know that their American record of attendance was at Arthur Ashe, and the way that ticket sales are starting to project for All In, it's going to be a push to see if they're going to be able to break that. But I think adding this super match that they have potentially with Toni Storm and Mariah May, they're on the right course to do that, right? But this was a very good match. Loved it. Every single second of it. I thought both women came off great. Obviously, Mercedes is probably the crown jewel of the women's division, her and Toni Storm. So you knew that they were going to be able to put Mercedes in a match that was going to be high on the card. And this could possibly, honestly, with the star power involved, it's not going to main event All In, but there's a chance and there should be chatter of that possibly being a scenario where that can happen. Guys, remember to like the video and subscribe. It helps the channel out in more ways than you even know. And it's free. All you got to do is take your big fucking fingers and slide over and hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. It's not that hard, all right? You guys know how to video edit and do all these crazy fucking TikToks. So just hit the button. Don't be a dick. Next, we're going to go into FTR versus Nigel McGuinness and Daniel Garcia. Obviously, it's very rare for us to see Nigel. Since he's been in AEW, he's only had 4 matches. You remember his epic return at All In at Wembley Stadium where the roof fucking went insane because we never expected to see Nigel in a wrestling ring again. But we got it. And tonight he was fighting the honor of Tony Schiavone. Obviously, if you guys aren't a member of the Collision Cowboys, which I know some of you guys are, but there's not as many Collision Cowboys as there used to be. You've been watching the show and you've seen FTR really giving Tony Schiavone a lot of hell. And Nigel McGuinness, as the good friend that he is, has stepped in and decided to fight for his honor, teaming up with the young lion, Daniel Garcia. Daniel Garcia, recently re-signed with AEW. I know for the past couple of months, there was a lot of back and forth. Were we going to see Daniel Garcia in AEW, or were we going to see him in NXT? There's a lot of back and forth. People saying one day he was NXT bound. The next day he was re-signed with AEW. Ultimately, he decided to re-sign with AEW, which, hey, can't fault the guy for getting a bag, right? You saw FTR in their heel bags, which I feel like that is a better natural position for these guys. I think they work better as heels. Their alliance with Stokely is and for my mind, it's a little bit unnecessary. Now, I'm not saying that to hate on Stoke, because Stokely, I feel like on the weekly television show, is a positive for any wrestler, but I don't really get the connection between him and FTR, and why is it really necessary? But I digress. Nigel McGuinness looked very good in this match. He has looked good in every single match that he's had really since he's made these 4 appearances in AEW, sporadically having these matches. Showcased mainly by that match that he had with Bryan Danielson at Arthur Ashe. You saw the bad guys get the W. You saw FTR come away with a win. They hit a shatter machine on Daniel Garcia. They had him in a hold. He did the classic no tap out, pass out due to the pain. FTR gets a much needed win. Daniel Garcia doesn't look bad by taking a pin, and Nigel McGuinness can go back to the booth and make his occasional in-ring returns when he feels like it. Next, we go into Ricochet versus Mark Briscoe in the stretcher match, which you knew was going to be violent. This is the first stretcher match in AEW history, which is insane to really think about it, because they are known for having these violent, creative matches. And the fact that it's taken them this long for them to get in a stretcher match is a little bit shocking and surprising. But I feel bad for Ricochet. This guy, obviously it's probably, not easy to lose your hair, right? If you guys don't know, Ricochet had a long, flowing head of hair years and years ago, and eventually he just had to accept his fate and chop it all off. And if you know Ricochet's infamous live where somebody asked him why you bald, you could tell that hit really bothered the guy at the moment. And the fact that they have made this his gimmick, that he is bald, that he is hair deprived, I find it very funny because just the guy gets repeatedly chanted at the fact that he is bald, and he can't help it. He's a baldy. But this is a very violent match, which you knew it was going to be. Mark Briscoe bled like a stuffed pig everywhere. It was very back and forth. Mark Briscoe, there were moments in the match where he paid tribute to Sabu, which you knew was going to happen, especially due to the fact that this was going to be a night there was going to be a lot of violence shown, especially with us having anarchy in the arena. Ricochet got a big time win. Ricochet has been very impressive since he's joined AEW. I never thought that the guy was that interesting, during his WWE run. Obviously, he's a very impressive athlete, but professional wrestling isn't 100% dependent on that for me. The person who I always considered to be the benchmark of who is the best professional wrestler of all time for up until recently was always Shawn Michaels. Now, due to the fact that the guy could have a good match with a broomstick, he was charismatic, especially with his work with DX. He has shown that he is able to do all these different great facial features, and he wasn't just this guy who was like, oh man, he could put on a good match, but he was the total package. And it kind of feels like, and when I say this, I'm not saying Ricochet is the next Shawn Michaels, obviously. But it really feels as if now, since he's joined AEW, he's found his niche, he's found his groove, and he's been one of the more interesting parts of the show on a weekly basis, which is not something that I was expecting when he signed in the first place. Obviously, I was expecting him to put on banger matches, especially with like Will Ospreay, but never was it on my bingo card that when I talked about who is the best heel in AEW at the moment, it was never going to be Ricochet in my mind. But the guy has made a believer out of me. He's probably made a lot of believers out of a lot of different people. He's done a lot of great work. He picked up the win tonight against Mark Briscoe by stabbing him in the head multiple times with those scissors, which we saw in his feud against Swerve Strickland. He brought them back, shoved Mark Briscoe in that ambulance, picks up the W. Guys, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't. Helps the channel out more ways than you even know. It's free. It's very helpful. Support biracial businesses. Next, we go into the Hurt Syndicate versus the Sons of Texas. This is a storyline that I feel as if has been pretty funny. The interactions between Bobby Lashley and MJF. As we all know, MJF is a snake. He's been a snake in the grass ever since he's joined AEW. He has snaked everybody that he's been close to. Snaked Cody Rhodes, who was his mentor. He snaked CM Punk, who was his idol. He snaked, we snaked Wardlow, who was this guy who was his close business associate. This guy's really been a piece of shit, right? So now we're just kind of waiting for the when, not if, he's going to snake the Hurt Syndicate. But he comes out. He's behind Bobby Lashley and Shelton Benjamin, right there beside MVP, doing the "We Hurt People" chant. They're set up for their match against the Sons of Texas. Now, going into this match, we never really doubted what the result was going to be, right? There was no way that Dustin and Sammy were going to beat the Hurt Syndicate. But you saw throughout this match, MJF kind of insert himself, trying to help the Hurt Syndicate in any way that he can. And it really reached a boiling point where he said to Shelton, like, this is taking too freaking long, man. He offers up the Dynamite Diamond ring. Bobby looks at him and says, no, we don't need that. Go over there. And you see Bobby spear Dustin to the barricade, which is pretty freaking cool, right? And he hugs MJF. This is the first moment where we really see that affection between these two guys. Because, as you know, Bobby was the last holdout of who was going to allow MJF and the Hurt Syndicate. But we saw that moment where he gave him some love with that hug after he sat there and he speared he speared Dustin, right? Shelton hit the thrust kick on Sammy for the win. The Hurt Syndicate retained the Tag Team Championship. Next, we're going into Okada versus Speedball Mike Bailey, which you knew was going to be a banger off the rip. Okada is probably the best big match wrestler in the whole professional wrestling industry. You can make a case for Will Ospreay. You can make a case for Kenny Omega. You can make a case for John Cena, who has a nickname of Big Match John. But if I had to put my life on the line and said, you need to have somebody who's going to put on a big time performance in a big time match for you to live. The person who I would have represent for myself to have my life online would be none other than Big Dog Okada. And he put on a banger with Speedball Mike Bailey. You knew that was coming. When Speedball made his debut in AEW, I feel like it was a natural fit. He was going to fit in like a glove. Speedball obviously was grinding and putting up a lot of work on the indies. He put up some bangers in TNA. He was one of the real bright spots of why you would even turn into TNA when he made his run. And I loved every second of this, right? Like I said, Okada's the best big match wrestler in the industry. I know a lot of people have been kind of throwing dirt on his name due to the fact that we don't see him as much, especially on a weekly basis in AEW, which I've been a critic of that as well. Because in my mind, you don't sign a wrestler as great as Okada not to use him as much as you possibly can. You know, it's very much reminiscent of that meme. You know that meme of like that Lamborghini, like in the driveway of that trailer, that shitty looking trailer. That's kind of what it felt for a minute. But he was able to come out here with Speedball. They put on a banger. Okada retains. He is obviously setting up to having this big time unification match with Kenny Omega at All In. And I feel like that will be the perfect solution because that Continental title, there's really no reason to have it. I think that they could use it similar to King of the Ring, where it's a one-time thing, not having a guy carry it throughout the year. Because if he's only going to defend it on a semi to very rare basis, there's no reason to have it. Just merge the titles. Next, we are going into the women's championship match between Mina and Toni Storm. Toni Storm is obviously the big homie in the women's division. She's the most interesting character in all of AEW. Her and Hangman. Mina, obviously somebody who Toni Storm has wrestled in the past, somebody who's very interlocked with Mariah May. I know a lot of people were expecting if we're going to get a return of Mariah May, it was going to be tonight, but that is not what we got, which is adding more credence to the rumors that she is WWE bound, and that's something that I thought was going to happen as soon as those rumors came out. There's no way AEW is going to resign her. If you follow Mariah May's social media activities throughout the years, it was always very pro WWE things. And to think about it, if she was going to resign with AEW, it was just going to be downhill from there. I think that the way that she had the Hollywood ending with Toni Storm, there's just no up. That was the pinnacle. Right? That feud with Toni Storm, that was the pinnacle. I remember one of the earliest videos I've ever done on this channel was speaking about how that was the best feud in storyline in all of professional wrestling at the time, which I stand by. And that was in the midst of like the bloodline stuff, right? Which I know a lot of you guys love. I felt that was very convoluted, especially right now. That shit sucks. But yeah, Mariah May is good as gone. So don't expect her on AEW television. And if I'm wrong, feel free to tell me I'm wrong later on down the line. But I don't think I will be. You had Mina put on a good show against Toni. She had Toni sell the fact that she had a leg injury, and Mina was having her in a figure four. Mina was doing all the things that she possibly could do. But Toni Storm hit the Storm Zero for the win. She retained, setting up that mega match against Mercedes Moné at All In, which I am freaking excited about because it feels like when you do this thing, right? The content creation of professional wrestling. I'm not saying we're all know-it-alls and we know everything, but it's like you can kind of tell where the tea leaves are, and you can kind of sense where the results are going to be, right? Who's going to win or who's not. But with this matchup, it really feels like a toss-up just due to the fact of who's going to be involved. Mercedes Moné has been undefeated in AEW. She hasn't taken a pin since she's joined the company. Stories come out that she hasn't even been broached, about losing. And I know a lot of people, they like to, shit on her and be like, oh, the creative control. She's, in her Hulk Hogan, your WCW Hulk Hogan mode. But from all the stories that are coming out, like, she hasn't even been approached about losing. So how could somebody turn down losing if nobody even brings up the possibility of you losing, right? So I'm excited for that match. Too early to tell, but if I had a gun to my head and said who's going to win, I think they are going to go with Mercedes to win that match. Woo, shit. It's late, man. I'm an old man. They need to start doing, if they're going to do these long-ass shows, they need to start doing that shit like 6:30. Next, we're going to go into Anarchy in the Arena, which is probably the match that people were anticipating the most. And it lived up to the hype. Now, this is different. It was Stadium Stampede. But if you ask me what my favorite Stadium Stampede / Anarchy in the Arena match ever was, it was that match during the pandemic era between the Inner Circle and the Elite. I thought that was freaking good and great. This was either just as great or maybe even a little bit better. You saw everything that you could have wanted to see in this match. You saw blood, you saw violence, you saw these different goofy angles that they always do when it comes to these matches. You saw the Young Bucks come out and they were dressed as founding fathers, like the country. What's going on, Brandon? You all right? What you doing up, man? Did you watch the show? Long night. But you saw them come out dressed as like founding fathers, like from the George Washington era, and they were playing that era of music. It was very, violent and very, chaotic into the beginning. When they first had the good guys come out, the baby faces, there was no Samoa Joe. We were thinking that possibly that he could have gotten attacked by the Bucks or the Death Riders, but that was not the case. Samoa Joe was lurking in the shadows, and as soon as they had the Death Riders come out, they were circling like sharks coming through the crowd. But it was no match for the Samoan Submission Machine. They were doing it similar to what they did last year, where they had the music playing throughout the match, and they were having the Founding Fathers music playing, and then you had Kenny Omega grab the mic, basically said, hey, turn that shit off, play something else. He starts playing I'm So Excited by the Sledge Sisters. You see Swerve getting down. By the way, Swerve came to the ring dressed as the Predator, which was pretty badass. One of the greatest science fiction films of all time. And that was cool. You had them getting down, but then Kenny Omega says, not that. We need to play some 2000s alternative rock. Play that shit. And you had Let the Bodies Hit the Floor, a classic for any community, whether you are a rock fan or not. Everybody has heard that song, and the crowd went freaking nuts. They probably played it like 3 or 4 times throughout that match, but this was chaos, man. And the way that they shot this was different from last year. They started off with like 4 screens, which I thought was very helpful because all those times in the previous matches when they had it, it was very hard to keep up, very chaotic, and I think that was the point, because just that's what the match is supposed to be. But I thought that was helpful that they started off with 4 screens. Eventually, it got to the point to where they dropped that shit and they had, went back to the traditional. But the person who came off looking the best, and this was Powerhouse Hobbs. Hobbs is the freaking man, right? Hobbs is somebody who obviously has the strength. He has the looks. He's somebody who AEW has probably been put in a good position now due to the fact that the big mans, they don't have that great of a track record with big men, but he's been probably put in a good position now due to the fact that Miro is gone. Now he's going to be able to have more TV time. He's healthy now. He's kind of been bit by the injury bug. I don't know what I keep doing with my hat. I guess it's me being an old man, right? Wondering. But this match was crazy. One of the highlights of this match was you see the battle, them battling on the balcony, right? And there's not, we've seen multiple times where guys have jumped off the balcony, most famously Sting doing it, but you see Kenny Omega flipping on the balcony, flipping on the Death Riders, flipping on the security. You saw them catch him, unlike that spot we saw in TNA. It was just nuts, right? They were battling outside. The women really put in a lot of good work here. Marina and Willow, they held their own. Those two women are obviously some badasses, especially Marina with her, MMA background. And going into this match, right, you would expect Jon Moxley to just be this bloody mess, right? It was one of the guys who didn't, he didn't bleed. There was no color from Mox, which was shocking, right? If you had to put the over and under, how many individuals would be bleeding, and would Mox be one of them, you would have lost some money because you saw no blood from Mox, right? But you saw Marina get some color. And you saw at one point Willow was locked on the side of the ring. You saw King Nana be able to break her out. But I think the spot that everybody's going to be talking about coming out of this show, right, especially coming out of that match, was you had a point where a staple gun was broken out. And you see, but it was I think it was Matt Jackson. He stapled Powerhouse Hobbs in the back with it. Powerhouse Hobbs no-sells it. He sits there and he grabs a staple gun from his hand and has him staple himself in the head, which I'm sure was not very pleasant of a feeling, right? You eventually have Swerve just go on a staple gun spree. He is stapling everybody, and then it gets to a point where Marina gets the staple gun. She low blows Swerve. She takes his tongue out, and she uses the staple gun on this man's tongue. Obviously, that shit had to hurt, right? And then you got to a point where Kenny Omega, this was actually ingenious, right? They still had the ambulance out there from earlier from the Ricochet and Mark Briscoe match. And it looks as if the Death Riders wanted to use it because there was a point in the match where Samoa Joe had Jon Moxley dead to rights. He had him in the middle of the ring choking out, but none other than New Japan's Gabe Kidd came to help out and attempt to save the day. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to kidnap Samoa Joe, similar to what happened in TNA. If you remember that storyline, Samoa Joe got kidnapped, and we never really got answers as to what happened. He just came back with a tattoo face. We never know what happened to him, but obviously it was some serious shit if he came back with a tattoo on his face, right? But you see the ops and the good guys be able to trap the Death Riders into the ambulance. They weren't able to escape. We got a cameo from Hook, planting some seeds as to what's going to go down in the future because Hook came and he attacked Claudio, who's the guy who took him out. Samoa Joe invites Hook to join in on the fun. Hook just kind of looks at him and shakes his head and walks away. And that's very understandable because if you guys know, Hook was the original third man of the ops. We've had Will Hobbs replace him. Obviously, there's going to be some frustration and tension between him and Samoa Joe, potentially setting up a rematch from that main event that we got on Dynamite where we had Samoa Joe versus Hook, which is probably Hook's best match of his career, right? That match was very good. So if we're talking about running it back with him and Hook, I am perfectly fine with doing that, right? But you have the heels in the ambulance, and you had an exploding table from the sideline where Kenny Omega took out one of the Bucks, leaving the last Buck. I get very confused. Who's Matt and who's Nick? I believe this was Nick left in the ring. And Swerve Strickland, if you don't know, he has a new Reebok coming out, the AIs, my favorite basketball player of all time, Allen Iverson. He has a shoe with Swerve coming out, a PE, if you don't know, Players Edition, basically. And it was and it had a whole bunch of tacks at the bottom. Oh yeah, forgot to mention. Again, Kenny Omega ate an EVP trigger with tacks in his mouth, which probably didn't feel good for him either, right? So many things that went on in this match that it's just like you're talking about something that's like, oh yeah, that happened. Oh yeah, this happened. It's hard to keep up, but I think that's the point of the match, right? So it's not crazy for me to be like, oh yeah, I forgot this spot or that spot when we're talking about Anarchy in the Arena. But it ends with Swerve hitting a stomp on him with the Allen Iversons with the tacks on the bottom. 1, 2, 3. Team AEW Swerve's guys wins. Swerve flashes his tongue, which still had the staple from earlier. Good stuff, right? Guys, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe. It helps the channel out in more ways than you even know. Next, we are into the Don Callis family versus the Paragon. This was the catch your breath match. This was if you need to take a piss or take a shit match. This is the time to do it because everybody was basically catching their breath from the Anarchy in the Arena match. And this, like I said, when I started this off, wasn't a bad match. It's just during a show that had all these higher stakes, something had to be a low light, right? And this just unfortunately fell in that category. You saw the Don Callis family win, but what was the main takeaway for this match was you had Ishii and Brody King come out after you had multiple members of the Don Callis family try to give a beatdown of the Paragon, and we got a surprise from Tanahashi, the president of New Japan, somebody who is making his retirement tour as well, just like John Cena. And they made the save. It's always good to see Tana, especially due to the fact that we're going to get Forbidden Door in the UK soon. So it's always good to see the ace, right? Next, we are getting into the main event of the show. Now, you have Will Ospreay, who has been just this bright and shining star in AEW ever since he's made his debut in a full-time transition. And you have Hangman Adam Page, who multiple times throughout this channel I have said is the most interesting character in all of professional wrestling. Him and Drew McIntyre, Tony Storm as well. Anytime they are on the screen, I am locked in. And they had these elaborate entrances basically telling the story between these two guys, right? We have the tagline for this match, Redemption versus Ascension, pretty much. And you had Hangman's video basically telling that story. And you had Will Ospreay's video telling, his story. And this was great. It was hard to follow up Anarchy in the Arena, but these guys did it in a way to where it wasn't so, one-sided if you had a debate which was better, which was not, right? You had Hangman pick up the W. And a match that was very good. There was a spot during this match, right, where they both took off their elbow pads, right? And it was a scenario, think about this, like a Western duel, where it was just like you're walking, two guys are walking, have their backs to each other, and who's the quickest shot was going to win. And Will Ospreay was the guy who didn't have the quickest shot. Hangman hit him with a buckshot. We thought we were going to get a 1-2-3 count. We didn't. Then we had immediately after Will Ospreay hit the hidden blade, and then he hit him with this what the fuck is his finisher. 1-2, 1-2. Didn't get the 3. Eventually, it got to a point where Hangman was able to, after this crazy sequences of all these different reversals and stuff, you got Hangman to be able to hit the buckshot. 1-2-3, setting up his hero redemption arc at All In. He is the winner of the Men's Owens Cup tournament, setting up the world title match between him and Jon Moxley. Now, multiple people, going into this Death Rider storyline, I think most people assumed Darby Allin was going to be the guy who was going to take the title off of Mox. Obviously, that's not happening because he decided that climbing up mountains was a little bit more important. But this is not the match that I think most people thought of last year when they said, hey, what is going to be the world title match at All In? And who is going to be involved? I think most people assumed it was going to... Shit. I think most people assumed Will Ospreay was going to be factored into it. But if we want to talk about from a storyline perspective, who is the most captivating character on the roster, I think Hangman is that guy. I think Hangman surely deserves it. I think they have 45 days until the show. I think Hangman is going to be able to really, really sink his teeth in and really be able to, show off this Rocky-like storyline that they have with him. This guy who's been taken to such a dark place, who is searching for just the light at the end of the tunnel and winning that championship, pursuing that championship, especially with the fact that the crowd is pretty much more behind him than they were Will Ospreay, which really is one of those things, we always hear the debate. What is more important in wrestling? Is it the character or is it the matches? And Hangman is somebody who's proven that he's able to put on good matches and also has the character. And I feel like the character work won out tonight, not just in the match, but from the crowd reaction. People really wanted to see Hangman win. We saw that. I'm excited. I'm excited to see what, hopefully this, I'm thinking that this Death Rider storyline has to come to an end, right? It has to. We are in the home stretch of this Death Rider storyline, and having AEW have this main event match between one of the AEW originals, a guy who is a homegrown talent, and Hangman Adam Page, and it finishes this arc, I think is the right move. I love me some Will Ospreay, but I think from a storyline perspective, this makes the most sense. And I'm satisfied with it. If I had to give this show on a Dave Meltzer star rating, I'd have to give it a 4.75. Not perfect, borderline perfect, but just slightly not. What? Why am I doing that? I feel like like when you go 4.75, that's kind of like copping out, right? Either give it 4 or 5. Screw it. I'm gonna give it. It was a 5-star show. It was a 5-star show. It was my favorite show of the year, probably since. Fuck. What was that? What was that WWE show? I know those. I remember there was a WWE show that I loved this year. I guess not if I'm forgetting it, right? But it was a very solid show. Enjoyed it. I really wish that they were able to start these things around like 6 or 7 because I'm an old man. But hey, guys, before I get out of here, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe. It helps the channel out in more ways than you even know. And spree. But guys, this was your Double or Nothing 2025 post show. I am Kevin Zwicker. About